Masters. She is the IEEE Power and Energy Society Vice President of Publications. She is a registered professional engineer in the state of Missouri and a fellow of the IEEE. Professor Prof, welcome to the platform.
Thank you. So good evening to everybody. I appreciate you staying on this late to hear my presentation. So what I'm going to be talking about is the IEEE Fellow nomination process. It is an activity that IEEE is working very hard to increase participation in and to help people become more successful with their nominations. So just to give you a little bit of my background, I started out serving on the IEEE Power and Energy Society Fellow Evaluation Committee. So that is the review that happens at the society level. And then since then, I have been on the IEEE Fellow Committee. I'm serving now in my 5th year on that, the 2nd term. And I've also served on the Fellow Strategic Planning Subcommittee, which is where a lot of this activity is occurring. So I'm going to go through the process here, and then we can take questions at the end. I think all of my slides will be available, and I certainly will be available for anybody if you have any questions. So the first thing I'd like to address is just who is eligible to be a fellow. And so basically at the time of nomination, which is typically at the beginning of March, you should have accomplishments, contributions to the technical field or educational field that have contributed to the advancement or application of engineering. So we're looking for people who have been fairly well known in their fields and have contributed something significantly to their field of interest. You must be an IEEE senior member or life senior member, and you must have been a member in good standing in senior member for a period of 5 years, preceding 1 January of the year preceding. So even though the nomination is due in March, you have to have been a member as of 1st January. So let me talk, in order to understand how to put together a good nomination, you really have to understand the review process. And the process really consists of 3 evaluations. The first evaluation is when you get an evaluation by the selected references for the nomination. So currently you are required to have anywhere between 3 and 5 references. These references must be fellows of the IEEE, and they are the ones who give an independent review of your qualifications. The second review is at the IEEE Society or Technical Council. So that could be Industry Applications Society, that could be Power Electronics. In my case, it was Power and Energy. But anyway, so your society is the one that provides the first nomination, and it is a nomination of your technical contributions at that point. The society does not evaluate you on your IEEE service or anything like that. It is simply a technical evaluation of your contribution to the technical field. And then the IEEE Fellow Committee is the third committee that reviews it. And this is the committee that reviews everything. So they review your reference letters. So the Society or Technical Council does not see the reference letters. They do see the endorsements. But the IEEE Fellow Committee is the one that reviews the reference letters. They review the entire nomination packet, which includes all of your awards. It looks at IEEE service. So really the whole package. So it is a different evaluation than the Society or Technical Council, which only reviews on technical merit. And so here's a figure of essentially the review process. So the first thing to do is that your nominator will get together, gets your references and endorsements and the nomination form. The first thing, and then that's March 1st is the deadline for that. And then from there, it goes to the Society or Technical Council Fellow Evaluation Committee. They review it. They look at their endorsement forms, and then coming out of the Society or Technical Council, they provide a score from 0 to 100 for you. Most of them are usually well above 70. They rank you with respect to all of the other candidates that they are reviewing that year. So that would be between 1 and however many nominations they get. And then they provide a narrative that discusses what is your contribution, what impact does your contribution have, and is there anywhere in which you fall short of attaining fellow status. From there, it goes to the fellow committee judges. We look at things such as professional activities, strength of your support levers, strength of the support of the society or technical society, technical council, and then also your technical accomplishments. And you can see over here, these are the weights that are given to each of these areas. There's also a slight weighting, so you can see those numbers, given to age. And that's just automatically assigned. That is not something that the fellow committee judges do. The older you are, the more weight you have. So there is something in there that is a bit objective. But all of these other things, so any IEEE activities would come up here. It does not necessarily have to be IEEE. It could be other professional activities that you've done. So here you get 15% based on your references. A lot of people are surprised by this, that it's not just simply a pass-through of what the society or technical council says. This is a score based on their support. So it's not just simply a through score ranking, and it is only 25% of the full ranking given by the fellow committee. And then the fellow committee does an independent evaluation of the technical accomplishments. And this is so that they can be normalized between all of IEEE and not just necessarily out of your technical committee. So then the review process comes in. There is something called an expedited review. And so we look at the set of all nominations. Oops, sorry, my apologies. If you are ranked at the top or the bottom of your society ranking, then you go into an expedited review. So if you're in the top, and these numbers change every year, they are voted upon, but let's just say for right now, if you're in the top 10% coming out of your society or technical committee, or you're in the bottom, let's say quarter. So if you are in the top, the extreme top or the extreme bottom, you go to an expedited review. And so then the judges perform an expedited review, and that's a special panel of experienced judges who do that. They look over, and if they agree with what your technical society has recommended, then you just simply go. There is no further review. However, if they think that there's perhaps something that your technical society missed, for example, maybe you have a lot of IEEE activities, which is not part of the review, or they think that they underrated or overrated your technical accomplishments, then they will send it back to a full review. And then you go through the full review that everybody else does. So then that comes through, and this is what the whole scale looks like. In any given year, a little less than a third of the nominations are elevated. I think this year we had slightly over 900 nominations, and 300 of those were elevated, and then the rest fall down here in the middle third, and then the bottom third. Okay, so what is a nomination evaluated on? Well, there are three primary things, and these are very important. And if you don't take anything away from this presentation, I'd like you to take this away. The first thing that you have to show in your nomination is that you have a technical or educational contribution to the field. Now, most people will have a technical contribution to the field. And then you must provide evidence, and it has to be verifiable evidence. It's something that someone sitting on one of the judging panels can go, they can Google it, or they can look it up in the library, or in some other way, they can verify that you did indeed contribute this. And so it has to be verifiable evidence that documents the contribution. And then the last thing is the impact that that contribution has had on the field. Have you made a significant impact? Have you changed the way things are done? Have you made something smaller, faster, more reliable, safer, anything like that? So really, there's three things: contribution, evidence, and impact. And you have to have all three of those presented in sufficient detail in order to be elevated. So contribution and impact and verifiable evidence will lead to success. Okay, at the IEEE fellow process, there are 4 categories in which you can be considered and evaluated. There is the application engineer or practitioner, an educator, a research engineer, scientist, and technical leader. The majority of the nominations come in this field, the research engineer and scientist. The next largest is application engineer or practitioner. And then technical leader and educator are typically about the same. And I'll talk about each of these in more detail here in a minute. So the application engineer. Okay, so this is someone who's typically in industry, doesn't have to be. If you're in a government lab, or if you're even at a university, but you have worked extensively with a company, or perhaps you've started your own small business, any of those things can lead you to be a successful application engineer. But typically what we're looking at in this category are things such as products, services, applications, and things that have been implemented and applied in industry. So if you were in the next thing, so if the contributions were made as a part of a team or a group, such as standards, then you need to explain clearly what is the individual role that the nominee has played. And I understand in many activities, it is a group effort. Well, then you have to show what your activity in that group was. Did you lead the group? Did you provide, significant measurements or implementation of it, etc.? So what innovation or creativity has been demonstrated? Did you make something faster, smaller, cheaper, safer? These are all things that need to be noted in part of the contribution. And then what is the most important tangible and verifiable evidence? And for an application engineer, these typically tend to be patents, reports, technical publications, not necessarily scholarly articles. And that's an issue that many people have problems with, is that they try and show, an application engineer has scholarly articles, where that's not really the most productive thing that we're looking for. Okay, as the educator, now this is a category that a lot of people mistakenly use. Just because you are an educator, just because you are a professor, does not necessarily mean that you should be nominated as an educator. If you are nominated as an educator, you need to show that you have made an educational contribution. So what impact have you had? So these are typically things such as, did you write a pioneering textbook? Have you developed a laboratory? Have you developed a curriculum or sets of examples that are used? And it has to be an impact that is just simply beyond your university. So simply being a good teacher or having graduated many PhD students does not necessarily mean that you are qualified in the educator category. There has to be an impact beyond your institution. That is impact. The research engineer and scientist, this is, as I said before, the most widely used category. And this is where the one where most people fall in. If you've been doing research, you want to be able to identify and describe what discoveries or advances. And typically we do that through scholarly publications that we publish, hopefully in the IEEE transactions, but not necessarily. And once again, as evidence, that would be scholarly publications, patents. Many research engineers and scientists do have patents. or other tangible and verifiable evidence. You know, that could be a book, for example, a monograph, things of that nature. And once again, if there was a team effort involved, we know many papers have multiple authors, then you want to state what your role in. Were you the advisor? Were you the corresponding author, etc. And then you want to describe and verify the lasting impact on society. Did you start a new line of inquiry? Did you provide a significant proof of concept in a particular area? These are all lasting impacts. And then the last category is technical leader. And once again, this is a category that's not as widely used as some of the others. And this is typically for someone who has led the field in some area. So you were the thought leader in a particular area. So what outstanding application or scientific accomplishment? So maybe you were, the vice president of engineering of a firm, and you led that firm in developing a critical part of the industry, 5G, for example, or something like that. But you took more of a technical leader role rather than as an application engineer role. And the lines between application engineer and technical leader could be blurred. But also an educator could also be a technical leader. If that educator has changed the way we've done education. I know, for example, right now, there's a lot of virtual education going on. So perhaps if you were an educator and you really did a lot of groundbreaking activity in developing virtual classrooms, you could be a technical leader, even though you are an educator. So basically, a technical leader is just someone who has framed out or provided a timeline or plan of action for an entire sector of the industry. Okay, so those are the 4 categories, and they've been in place now for several years. If you have submitted a nomination before, I'd like to point out that this year, moving forward, starting in 2021, there have been some significant changes to the nomination form. And this is hopefully to get everybody to concentrate specifically on the areas of contribution, evidence, and impact. So the nominator is now asked to elaborate in separate, clearly defined sections on the value of the technical or educational contributions. So before this, prior to this year, the nomination form asked for a list of itemized, 3 significant items of evidence and then 5 secondary items of evidence. That's no longer required. It's just simply a narrative. Now, certainly you could enumerate lists or items of evidence there. That's certainly allowable, but we no longer require that you have lists of evidence. The activities and awards sections have been simplified and grouped into IEEE and non-IEEE activities. In the past, they've just been grouped together. So now explicitly you can say these are my IEEE activities, these are my non-IEEE activities. And same thing with IEEE awards and non-IEEE awards. We certainly expect that many very active people are going to have non-IEEE, and that's certainly acceptable. So not everything has to be IEEE. I would hope that you would have at least some IEEE activities. And then the last thing is that an ORCID ID is now going to be required. Everybody or anybody can get an ORCID ID. You don't have to be a research engineer or a professor. You don't necessarily have to have published in scholarly publications to have an ORCID ID. All this does is that it gives a disambiguous identifier. We have many people who have the same name, and this is just to allow us to differentiate when we're looking for verifiable evidence, that we're using the evidence that is specific to you and is not someone else's evidence. So to give you an example or an idea of what the 2021 nomination form looks like, so this is for the class of 2022. So if you were to submit a nomination in March, this is what you would be doing. There are 2 sections because you're allowed to, or you are asked to show 2 primary individual contributions. So there is section 7 for your first one and section 8 for your second one. So you are asked to identify the individual contribution, which qualifies the nominee for fellow grade. And this is 200 words. So you say this person has done something, and this is just simply a narrative. And then you want to give verifiable evidence of this contribution. And here you have 400 words. So here's where you might say these are patents, these are papers, these are software, this is an application that's been done, this was implemented in industry, so on and so forth. The next section, you want to show the impact of that contribution. How has it changed the way things are doing? I mean, you can make a contribution, but if it gets ignored or it's not something that someone else uses, then it doesn't really have much of an impact. So that's where you want to show the impact of what you've done. How has it changed the way we do things? How has it made things better? And then the last one is your verifiable evidence of impact. So here, note that we have 2 categories for showing verifiable evidence. So the first one is just evidence of contribution. I say I've done this, and here's the evidence that I did it. And then I'm going to say, here's my impact. And then here I'm going to show what the evidence of my impact was. So we're really going to pull out where you have to show contribution, right? So that's the first part, evidence, and then impact. Those are the 3 things that you must have. So technical contributions can really be anything. Inventions, discoveries, advances in the state of the art, improvements to the design or manufacturing, the use, operation, or application of such products, or an advancement to industry practices and standards. So if you have been very active in standards, that is certainly a technical contribution as well. Educational, so IEEE says your contributions can either be technical or educational. But as I said before, most people, I would say 95 plus people are going to come in with technical contributions, probably not so much educational contributions. But a typical educational contribution might be the development of a new curriculum, course, or laboratory that is innovative. And it must, so that's your contribution. You can show evidence of that. But then to show impact, you must show that it has been adopted beyond your university. So for example, if you've written a textbook, you have to show that perhaps, X number of universities have adopted your textbook and then it's widely used. That would be an impact. So those are our examples. They're not limited to those examples, but those are examples of contributions. And so evidence, what is your evidence? Well, it has to be something that someone else can confirm, right? I should be able to go and look it up, either online, in the library. If it's a newspaper article, I should be able to find that newspaper article. And so if you provide a verifiable date for when the item was produced, so for example, if it was a technical report, for your government, those are online. Just provide a date and say, this was done back in March of 2018. And then we can then verify that that indeed does really exist. And so during the nomination, there should be a narrative. You shouldn't just provide an item of evidence without describing how it feeds into what your contribution is. Why do you think this is an important item of evidence? And hopefully that you're going to show a story. If I have something and I say I have really contributed to this particular area, I'm going to show, kind of a timeline perhaps of technical articles I've had in this area, starting with maybe the first one where I laid out my initial concepts, and then as I've gone through the years, how this has branched out. And then also in terms of impact, I would show where other people have now taken some of my ideas and they are implementing it in their own work. That would be impact. And so I want to write a narrative that really lays out my story of both evidence and impact. And all presented items should refer directly to the nominee's distinctive contributions. This is another thing. Remember, once again, you have a word limit. And a lot of times people, will say, well, this person has graduated, 20 PhD students. Well, that does not contribute to your contribution. I mean, that's just wasted space. And so things like that should be avoided. Your H index is another thing that should also be avoided because we're looking at very specific, significant contributions. We're not looking at a body of work here. We're looking at very specific, you get 2 contributions, 2 technical or educational contributions, and then the impact and evidence of those. And so if you don't want to say something that takes away from your word length, just simply to put it in there. We all know that you're very nice. We get a lot of that, a lot of that wordage. A lot of times this person's very nice, they're very active, they're a good teacher, all of these things. Well, once again, those are not verifiable evidence, number one, but also it doesn't really support your case. So let's talk about impact and evidence of impact. So contributions impact is measured by the amount it has extended the boundaries of the current state of technology. So you can assess that by quantifying improvements in understanding, understanding the process, the cost, reliability, safety, size, anything in engineering. So we think, we do things for improving society. Okay, so you say I've improved society, that's my impact. Now I have to show how I've improved society. And the evidence should provide an overview of how the contribution was initially introduced to the field, right? You want to make this a story. Start with the initial evidence and show how that impact has grown over time. So one thing is another mistake that people commonly make is they provide as an item of evidence, a technical paper that was written in 2019. All right, that was last year. Something that was published last year has not had enough time in the public eye to really have an impact. So you need to think about things to have an impact have to have been out in the technical field for enough time to have changed the way things are being done. So just be careful when you're citing your evidence. You don't want to get things that are way too new. Now, if you're showing a timeline of developments, it's okay to maybe have one, but you don't want all of your evidence items to be very recent because that doesn't show impact. That may show evidence of technical contribution, but it doesn't show impact. So here's just kind of a quickie table of all of the 4 areas and what might be considered types of evidence of contribution and evidence of impact. There's a lot here in this table, so I'll just kind of point out some of the primary ones. So we'll just start with AEP, which is the application engineer. So scholarly publications, that's not expected or required. You're an application engineer. You're out in industry, and you're probably not writing journal articles very much. Now, you may have a couple, that's okay, but it's not expected. What is expected to see if you're an application engineer is patents, right? If you're out in the industry and you're doing something, hopefully you've had some patents. So those are expected, typical, and very useful. Products and services, right? So you've developed an algorithm that's used in software. You've developed a model that's used in software. You've developed a manufacturing process. You've made something more reliable. So those are all expected, typical, and very useful for an application engineer. Standards, if you're involved in standards, it's very good to show where you've been involved in standards because that certainly shows an impact on the field. But not everybody who's in industry is involved in standards, and that's okay. And the same thing with peer recognition, right? That's useful. Now, let me say a little bit here about the role of endorsements. Okay, so every nomination is allowed to have 3 endorsements. And these endorsements are typically not used in the best way that they could be used. Endorsements are not references. You have your references for that. Endorsements will say, for example, if you're an application engineer or practitioner, and you say in your nomination that this has increased sales of our product by 25%. All right, well, obviously it's going to be hard to find evidence of that, right? There's not going to be something out there that says that, but you can have an endorsement, right? This endorsement can be, someone from your company. It can be someone in the field, who uses your product. But this is an endorsement that says, yes, this claim, I verified this claim. And that's how you want to be using your endorsements. They are going to endorse what you have claimed. They're not just other references that say, yes, this is a great guy, he's done a lot. They are very specific and they have a very specific role. So now what is the evidence of all of these? Well, citations of patents, right? Has your patent been licensed? Have other people cited your patents and their patents? Things of that nature. Revenues from patents and products. Once again, that would have to come from an endorsement, right? If you say my product has increased profits by, several $1 million, well, you're going to need someone to say, yes, indeed it has. Peer recognition, specific awards. I know some countries give awards for, the innovator or entrepreneur. And then endorsements, once again, endorsements to verify the nominator's claims on impact and the role of the nominee. So endorsements are very, very important if you're an application engineer or practitioner. Now, if you're a research engineer and scientist, the other most used category. Now, in this case, scholarly publications are expected, right? You're an educator. That's what you're supposed to be. You're a professor. You're a researcher. That's where you're expected to show the majority of your items of evidence. Patents are useful, but not necessarily required. Products and services, very useful, especially, if you're an industry research engineer and scientist, right? So if you're in industry, you don't necessarily have to come in as an application engineer. You can be a research engineer in industry. It just depends on what your role is. But it's nice if you're a research engineer or scientist in a university and you've developed something and it is then used in an industry piece of software. That's a very good thing because that's impact, right? That shows that it's just not an ivory tower kind of theoretical development, that it actually has made an impact in the field. Standards, if you are a research engineer, you may not necessarily get involved in standards, and that's okay. Peer recognition, once again, is very important. And when we say peer recognition, this usually comes in the form of citations, paper citations for your work here. And so evidence of impact would be citations of non-tutorial publications. So these are going to be citations of paper where you have actually contributed. Now, a lot of highly cited papers are things such as tutorials, bibliographies, overviews, and they're highly cited just simply because of those ideas. But there tends to be very little in terms of original contribution in a tutorial. So if you're going to include something as evidence, it should be something that you have contributed to individually. An endorsement, for example, if you have had an impact on standards, stating that a publication impacted a standard, or an endorsement if something, for example, has been used in industry, then you would want an endorsement from someone in industry that says, yes, we have indeed used this in our software, in our process, etc. And peer recognition, specific awards, if you've been received one of the IEEE awards, that's always great. If you've given keynotes at a large conference, or invited papers is another thing. If you've been invited to write a paper for a significant publication or magazine, those are all good things. Those show evidence of impact because they show that you have impacted the field to the point where other people have noticed. Now, I'm not going to go through the other ones here, but they're certainly there if you'd like to go ahead and take a look at them. So let's just say a few things about some of these items of evidence. So scholarly publications. So as I said before, these go into, you have your references who evaluate these. You have your fellow society, and then also you have the IEEE society. And so there will be some judge here of the quality and impact of the publications. And so, as a nominator, you want to give information for people to go on. And different fields have different landscapes for, how they list authors. In some case, the authors are listed alphabetically. In some cases, it's listed with graduate student, followed by everybody else. In some cases, it's the lead of the lab is the person who goes first. So you want to provide that information in your narrative according to that, because you need to provide that information. In some societies, papers tend to be really long. You can get a 20-page paper. In other societies, the pages on their scholarly publications are limited. These are all things that you might want to note when you're talking about your verifiable evidence. Example, the number of citations of a paper can show impact. If it's highly cited, of course, it's going to be impactful. As I talked before, the H index is not necessarily so, because that does show body of work. A field-weighted citation impact. You can sometimes, on Scopus or in IEEE Explore, get the weighted impact for an individual papers. How much that particular paper has been cited, and then also the weight of the journal in which it appears. And so that's your weighted citation. And those are good pieces of bibliometric indices to give. Now, evaluators and judges will use their own knowledge. And so if I come from a technical field where it's not unusual for people to write 12 papers a year, but you're from a field where it's typical for people to write 3 papers a year, that's good information to know. And so your nominator can say something of that. Your references might be able to allude to that. You might have an endorsement that says something to that effect as well. So what is a typical citation count in a specific field? Is a paper that's cited 100 times considered highly cited, or does it need to be cited 500 times to be considered highly cited in your particular field? Now, if you're having patents, so some things to consider when your patents, has the patent been sold or licensed to a third party? That's always good information. What revenues is it generating? Has it been cited? Has it been cited in other patents or in other, in papers, for example? Is the patent important for the assignee to remain on the cutting edge of technology? Right, so you want cutting edge patents. Has it initiated a new business? Right, so if you're in academia and you started a small business and you have some patents, maybe from some of your graduate students, those are good things to include in there. Have you started a new business venture? Has that new business venture been successful? And then have you published a refereed technical publication in addition to the patent? Once again, this is not required, but it's always nice to have that if you do indeed have that. Let's talk a little bit about standards. So if you're an application engineer practitioner, you may be involved in standards. And standards are a little more difficult. You have to have taken a significant role in standards. You can't just simply be on the committee and be a reader. You must have impacted in a significant way. So were you the chair? Did you lead technical discussion? Did you write a significant section of the standard? Did you move towards revising a standard? Was there a need for a revision and you're the one who pushed that forward? So all of those things are things that you want to highlight if you're using standards as some of your evidence and impact. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, so that's all the nomination form. So let's talk a little bit about the references. So you can have 3 to 5 references. These are all IEEE fellows, except if you're in Region 9, then it can be a senior member. And Region 9 is South America. So references provide information about the value of the nominee's contributions. They are supposed to be an independent evaluation of someone who is familiar with your work. So typically it is someone from your own society. Doesn't have to be, but it is typically someone who is familiar with your work. They may or may not know you personally, but that's okay. But they should know your work, right? Because they're going to say, hopefully a good reference would say, I think this person really changed the way we thought about this field. I have used some of these results in forming my research field. My students have built off of theirs. I've been in correspondence with this particular person. You don't want to cut and paste from the nomination. A reference should be an independent evaluation. It should not just, mimic what was said in the nomination. It should provide something new and hopefully, a fresh look at the nominee. And once again, it should focus on the nominee's contribution only. Things such as, this is a great guy. I've always enjoyed working with him on committees. All of that stuff. That's not relevant to this. This should speak specifically to the contributions that were outlined, the 1 or 2 primary technical contributions that were outlined in the nomination. And remember, a mediocre reference is worse than no reference at all. And I've seen that. And it doesn't even have to be a negative reference. It could just be something that's just simply very generic. Yes, I know this person. He's a great person. He's well known in the field. He's very active. I haven't said anything negative about that person, but that is not a good reference. It's a very mediocre reference. It really, says that the reference has not thought that the nominee has a lot of impact in the field. So be very careful, either if you're writing a reference, to be very specific, or if you're asking someone to write a reference for you or your nominee. Endorsements. So I've talked about endorsements before. These are very important, and most people don't use them in the way that they're meant to be used. They're used to attest to the impact of the nominee's contributions in the case where verifiable evidence is limited, right? So if I say it saved my company, $10 million, or it's increased our productivity, there's not going to be a scholarly publication that says that. So I want to get someone in my field who can say that. And so that's what an endorsement is. It's not a reference. It is something that is very specific to a certain claim in my nomination that can't be verified otherwise. It's very helpful, particularly to those nominees who have been nominated in the application engineer, practitioner, or technical leader categories. And once again, I want to stress these are not pseudo references. So if an endorsement comes in as a pseudo reference, it's useless, and you've just lost the chance to include an endorsement that could really add to your nomination. All right, so some comments. So I've talked a little bit about things not to do. But here I want to make it very clear. A nominee is elevated based on individual contributions, not a body of work. I think this is where many people have problems. They say this is a very prolific author. They've done so much to the field. They're the grandfather of this field. That doesn't matter, right? These have to be individual contributions, not a body of work. And the evidence item should refer directly to the nominee's contribution. It may be, maybe you wrote a paper that's been very highly cited, but it was just like a one-off paper. And I know you want to include that in your nomination because it was very highly cited. But unless it really supports, and you can show evidence and show the impact of that to your stated contribution, it's not really worth having it there in your narrative of evidence. Citations, you want to show a sustained contribution in a particular area, not just that you were a prolific author. Being a prolific author is a body of work. It's not just a specific contribution. Pieces of evidence that cannot be correlated with one of the contributions are unnecessary. They shouldn't be there. An award is not an item of evidence for a contribution. An award may be an item of evidence for impact, but it is not an item of evidence for contribution. That's another common thing. They say, oh, well, this person's received this award. Well, that's not evidence of contribution. It's evidence of impact. So carefully consider the right time to make a nomination. Unfortunately, we do see people who are nominated too early. And these are very good people, very, very young and ambitious people. But they just simply don't have enough out in the public to be able to say that they've had impact. If all of their scholarly articles have been within the last 5 years, it's hard to say that, yes, these have had impact. Because to have impact, you have to have them out there to be cited, and then those people have to have had time to take that work and have their work be considered important as well. So, just make sure that that it's the right time in a person's career. that they do have enough. Otherwise, if they're nominated too soon and they don't make it, then they get frustrated with the whole process. So allow time for the impact to be recognized. And also don't use the education category unless you have been truly focused on improving technical and engineering education, right? So engineering pedagogy, for example. This is a real common problem that people think, well, I've graduated so many PhDs, I should be an educator. Well, you've graduated so many PhDs because you've been doing research. So you should be in the research category and not education. So at this time, I will see if I have any questions. Let me just come here. Here's my contact information. I am more than happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. And also, I did want to show one thing here. So I'm on the Fellows Committee, and we are working on a recommendation guide. You can see that this is this month. We're hoping to get this posted to go along with the nomination form for next year. So essentially everything that I've said here in my talk will be written down in this recommendation guide, and it should be available from the IEEE Fellows website, but it will go through everything that I've just talked about. And now the important thing that I want to show is that in this guide, we are going to have examples. So this is what we are most commonly asked for, examples of what a good nomination should look like. And so it will have examples in each one of these categories so that everybody can see what a good example looks like. This is not currently available. In fact, we have a meeting later today to talk about this guide and hopefully approve it, in which case then it will be posted to the nominator website. But just keep looking back at the IEEE Fellow website. Okay, so now I will go ahead and open the floor for questions.
Participant, hello participant. If any question, kindly write in the chat box, right hand corner. Okay, so directly to ma'am. So, ma'am, ma'am, it is.
Yes.
Hello, ma'am. Hello,
Yes.
ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, so kindly see the chat box. Okay, so participants directly ask question through chat box to you.
Yes. I have my chat box open, but I don't see any questions yet.
So any question kindly write to chat box. Okay, and I will ma'am already shared her email ID, and I will also share ma'am email ID for any question. Okay, so we have a 5 or 6 minutes, so kindly write if you have any question. We can take 2, 3, 4 questions, and then we'll end the session. Ma'am, you have a question. One person have a question. How many IEEE transaction and IEEE Society flagship conference are needed for IEEE fellowship?
That's a tough question. So the question is how many articles are required to be a fellow? And there really isn't any particular number. Because what you want to show, you can write one paper and have it have, a lot of impact in the way things are done, in which case that's all you need. But typically I would say, typically less than 10, and I would say even maybe 5. If you have 5 impactful articles in, that correlate to the contribution that you list, then that's really all you need. Because once again, we are not looking at H index, right? We're not looking at your body of work. We're looking at specific contributions. And so, if you have 5 or so papers, correlated to a specific contribution, that's really all you need.
I have a question. Hello.
Yes?
I have a question. If you are a member of a few societies, which societies that you have to select to apply under?
Okay, so the question is which, if you're a member of multiple societies,
Yes,
how do you
correct.
select which society you want to evaluate?
Yeah.
I think that would have to do with your contribution. So in which society covers the technical field of interest that your contributions are most related to. So, and I think that's a judgment you have to make. If you've published more in one transaction of a society than another, that might be a good way of determining. If your references, for example, might come from one society more than another, that's another way. I can't really tell you. I think in many cases, most people can be evaluated by more than one society. Maybe the one that you've been particularly most active in is another way of doing it as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ma'am, next question is, does book publication help in IEEE fellowship?
Yes, it does. Because that can go, that can, be part of your well, let me just say, it depends on what the book is. If the book is a compendium of many different people and you're the editor, then probably not. But if it's a book you've written yourself on your field, that can be an item of evidence, right? Look, I've done a lot of work in my field. I've compiled it all here. Hopefully, if it's a textbook, that's a good thing. You'd want to probably get an endorsement from your publisher that says it has been it's been used or it's sold X number of copies, or maybe you can go on Amazon and say how many times it's been purchased or cited, things of that nature. So yeah, a book is a good piece of evidence. I don't think I'd use it as my only evidence, but I think that having a book is a good way to show that you've done a compilation in the field. I would say though that I think technical publications are probably stronger because they are peer reviewed. Many books are not peer reviewed, or at least not in their entirety. They're just reviewed by the publisher. And so that's harder to say. And so that's the case. If you're using a book, you want to use, once again, citations or adoptions. But I would say, you can use a book, just not have that be your only evidence.
Okay, Anku sir, kindly give the formal vote of thanks.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Myself, Dr. Ankush Ghosh, honored to have the opportunity to deliver the vote of thanks for this wonderful keynote session. So first of all, I would like to thank Mariesa for sharing a very valuable and informative and knowledge about the IEEE Fellow nomination process, and especially in the integrity of how to apply and what to apply and what are the eligibility criteria about the fellow, about the nomination process, about the fellow selection. Much, madam, for your informative talk. On behalf of the organizer, fifth International Conference on Computing, Communication and Automation, ICCCA 2020, I would like to thank you for your valuable time you have given for this conference. So I would also like to thank the conference chair and coordinators for their support. Last but not the least, I thank to all the attendees for their active participation in this session. I want everyone for making this session successful. Thank you all.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you.